Ethan Cole had long ago made peace with loneliness. His ranch lay tucked between two low ridges of red stone, where the wind sang through broken fences and the sun burned every shadow flat. Days bled into one another, tending horses, mending rails, watching dust storms crawl across the horizon. He didn't mind it. Solitude was simpler than people. People left, people lied. Out here, only the wind answered back, and it asked for nothing. That afternoon, the light was sharp, the air dry enough to taste iron. He'd been out since dawn, looking for a lost mare that had wandered too far from the herd. The land rolled endlessly, a sea of brittle sage and sun-bleached bone. His horse's hooves stirred lazy clouds of dust, the sound lonely against the silence. Then he saw it, something dark and still in the distance, swaying faintly against the pale riverbed. For a moment he thought it was a broken fence post. Then the wind shifted, and he realized it was a person. He spurred his horse hard. The world narrowed to the thud of hooves and the pounding of his heart. When he reached her, his throat went dry. A woman hung from a crude wooden frame, wrists tied, skin blistered under the desert sun. Her head hung forward, black hair tangled across her face. He leapt down, cutting the ropes with his knife. Her body fell into his arms, lighter than he expected, warm but weak. He lowered her gently to the ground. Her lips were cracked, her breathing faint but stubborn. "Hey," he whispered, shaking her shoulder carefully. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. He poured water from his canteen onto a cloth and touched it to her mouth. She swallowed weakly, gasping as if it burned. "Water," she croaked, voice thin as smoke. "Easy," he said. "You'll get more soon." He checked her arms. No broken bones, just rope burns and bruises that told of a long fight. Whoever had done this hadn't meant for her to live. He lifted her onto his horse, holding her close against his chest to keep her steady. The sun was sinking now, painting the desert in bands of copper and blood. He urged the horse toward home, each step slow and careful. The woman's head rested against his shoulder, her breath shallow but alive. When they reached the ranch, he brought her inside, laying her on his bed, a rough blanket over clean sheets that suddenly seemed too soft for someone who'd endured such pain. He lit a fire, its crackle the only sound in the room. Her eyes opened briefly, wide, unfocused but alive. "You're safe now," he said softly. She blinked at him, lips trembling as she whispered, "My name's Clara." Then, after a pause, the words that made his blood run cold. "Someone tried to kill me." He didn't press her. There'd be time for that. For now, he filled a bowl with warm water, cleaned her wounds, and covered her with his coat. She turned her face toward the firelight, and he saw, beneath the grime and pain, a kind of strength that wasn't born from luck, but survival. The wind outside began to rise, rattling the shutters and carrying the long moan of the open plains. Ethan sat by the fire, elbows on his knees, watching her chest rise and fall. He told himself he was only making sure she'd live through the night, but it wasn't the whole truth. Something in him, something buried beneath years of silence, stirred uneasily. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. Whoever she was, she carried the same weariness he did, the same quiet war fought behind the eyes. Hours later she woke again, her gaze sharper this time. "Where am I?" she asked. "My ranch," he replied. "Nearest town's 2 days' ride." "You're lucky I found you." She studied him, the lines around his eyes, the scar on his jaw, the unspoken distance he wore like armor. "You didn't have to bring me here," she murmured. Could have left me," Ethan shrugged. "Didn't seem right to leave a soul hanging in the desert." Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "Then you're either kind or foolish." "Maybe both," he said. By midnight the storm rolled in, dry thunder and sand sweeping over the plains like ghosts. Ethan sat awake, the rifle leaning against the wall. Clara slept, her breathing steadier now. He stared into the fire, thinking of what she'd said. Someone tried to kill me. He wondered what kind of woman was hunted in a place like this, so far from anything civilized. Not a bandit. Her hands, even torn and bruised, bore the grace of someone who'd once lived another life, maybe in the city, maybe among the rich, who'd never seen this kind of hunger. At dawn, he stepped outside. The world smelled of dust and ash. He looked across the wasteland, half expecting to see riders coming over the ridge. Nothing but silence. He fed the horses, fixed the gate hinge, and tried to lose himself in routine. But when he walked back inside, Clara was sitting up. She wore one of his shirts, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, eyes bright and unflinching. "You're a hard man to wake," she said dryly. "I thought maybe I'd died." He smiled faintly. "Not yet." As the sun rose higher, she told him bits of her story. Not all, but enough. A widow, 28, traveling with a group bound west for new business, ambushed near the border. Men she trusted turned on her, left her to die. Ethan listened quietly, jaw tight. "You got enemies," he said. She nodded. "We all do. Some just hide better than others." He looked away, remembering faces of his own past, debts unpaid, hearts buried. For a long time neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the slow rhythm of her breathing. When night came again, she stood at the doorway, looking out across the empty plains. "You live alone," she said quietly. He nodded. "Always have." "That's not living," she murmured. "That's waiting." He turned to her then, truly seeing her. Not the bruises, not the mystery, but the defiance still burning in her eyes. "And what are you?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "A woman who stopped waiting a long time ago." Outside, the desert stretched endless and unbroken, the stars sharp as broken glass. Inside, the silence between them shifted, no longer empty, but full of something fragile and new. Ethan Cole didn't know who Clara Monroe really was, or what danger followed her across the wasteland. But for the first time in years, he realized he wasn't alone, and that scared him more than any bullet ever could. Days that followed were slower, gentler, yet filled with quiet tension neither of them dared name. Clara healed, but not just in body. Each morning she stood a little taller, her voice steadier. Beneath the bruises and sunburn, there was a woman of purpose, the kind who had built empires and buried her doubts under discipline. Ethan noticed how she carried herself, even while pouring coffee or brushing the horses, with the subtle confidence of someone used to commanding rooms full of men who underestimated her. It didn't take long before the truth began to unfold. One evening, as the desert cooled and the fire crackled, Clara spoke. Her tone was low, controlled, but her eyes carried the weight of something she'd been holding for too long. "Chicago," she said. "I was an investor in the railway. We were supposed to bring the new line through the territories, faster, safer routes." She hesitated. "But there were men who didn't want a woman with that kind of influence." Ethan didn't speak, but his jaw clenched. He understood the kind of power that frightened men, not bullets, but brilliance. "They framed me," she continued. "Said I stole from the company. By the time I realized the trap, it was too late. They sent men after me to silence me." Her hands trembled slightly around the tin cup. The firelight painted her face in shades of gold and shadow. "They didn't expect me to live long enough to tell the truth." Ethan studied her, the flames dancing in his eyes. "You're telling me they left you to die out here because you had brains?" She met his gaze. "Because I had courage," she corrected softly. He leaned back, silent for a long moment. The crack of the fire filled the space between them. "You don't scare easy," he said finally. She smiled faintly, tired but proud. "Neither do you, Mr. Cole." The way she said his name carried warmth, a tone he hadn't heard in years. That night, as she slept, he sat outside under the stars, rifle resting across his knees, watching the horizon. He knew trouble like hers didn't just vanish. The past always found its way across the desert. By the end of the week, Clara was walking more, helping around the ranch like she belonged there. She cleaned the tool shed, fixed the water trough, and even mended a torn saddle strap. Ethan watched her with quiet admiration. "You run a company, but you can fix leather too?" he teased. She shot him a look that almost laughed. Where I come from, you learn to do everything yourself. No one hands you survival. There was something magnetic about her. The way she spoke with certainty, yet carried loneliness beneath it. One afternoon, as he was tending the fence line, she joined him. You could have left me there, she said softly, echoing her words from before. Ethan adjusted the rope, tightening the post. Could have, he said without looking up. Didn't. She stood there a moment, the wind tugging her dark hair across her face. Then maybe I owe you my life. He shook his head. No, you owe yourself the chance to start again. She looked away, a faint smile curving her lips. Then maybe this place, this quiet, is the start. That night, thunder rolled across the desert. Rain came in slow sheets, tapping against the roof, filling the silence between them. Clara sat by the fire, reading from a worn notebook she kept hidden in her coat. Plans, she said when he asked. Dreams I had before everything burned down. Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside her. You still got time to rebuild. She looked at him then, really looked, and said, maybe I don't need to rebuild. Maybe I just need somewhere to belong. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said everything. By morning, the storm had passed, and the desert shone under a silver sky. The air smelled of rain and sage. Clara helped feed the horses, her laughter soft and unguarded. Ethan hadn't realized how much he'd missed the sound of another voice, another presence beside him. For years, his life had been measured in chores and sunsets, the quiet ticking of time. Now each hour carried color again. In her words, her movement, her stubborn will to live. She had brought something back into the house that he'd forgotten existed, warmth. But danger was patient. One evening near dusk, Ethan spotted tracks, 3 horses, coming from the ridge. Men had been here, he told Clara quietly. Her face went pale but steady. They found me, she said. They won't stop. He loaded his rifle, eyes fixed on the horizon. Then they'll regret coming. When the riders finally appeared, they kept their distance, circling like vultures before vanishing into the dusk. That night neither of them slept much. The fire burned low, and between the flickering shadows, their hands brushed once, not by accident. Days passed, and the threat didn't return. Perhaps fear had done what bullets didn't need to. Life settled again into a fragile rhythm. 2 people finding meaning in the smallest things, coffee at dawn, mended fences, shared glances. Clara began writing again, drafting business notes in the margins of old ledgers. You planning to rebuild your company out here? Ethan asked one morning, half smiling. No, she said. Something smaller, something real. She looked around at the land, at the endless horizon. Maybe I just want a life that can't be bought. When summer arrived, her scars had faded, but her presence lingered like a storm that refused to die. She had become part of the ranch and of him. One afternoon she found him fixing the gate. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. No, he said simply. Everything I ever ran from ended up right here anyway. She smiled softly. Then maybe that's what I was, something you stopped running from. He turned to her, eyes meeting hers with quiet honesty. No, he said. You're something I was waiting for. The ranch that once echoed with silence now carried new sounds, the rhythm of 2 people building a life out of the ashes of the past. Laughter where there had been wind. Hope where there had been dust. Some nights they still sat by the fire, speaking little, letting the world outside fade away. She'd rest her hand over his, and he'd squeeze it once. No promises, no fear, just the steady heartbeat of something they both thought they'd lost long ago. Peace. In the end, the men never returned. Maybe they'd forgotten her, or maybe they'd realized she was no longer alone. Word spread slowly through nearby towns of a woman from the east who disappeared, and a quiet rancher who never spoke of what he found in the desert. Some called it rumor, others called it redemption, but those who passed near Ethan Cole's land sometimes saw 2 figures at dusk, one mending fences, the other tending flowers that shouldn't have survived the heat. And they knew the story still lived there, whispered in the wind, The wasteland had taken everything from them once. But together, they reclaimed it, not through power or wealth or revenge, but through quiet defiance. In the land that erased every footprint, Ethan and Clara left theirs side by side, pressed deep into the earth and the heart of each other's lives. And when the wind carried their laughter across the empty plains, it sounded less like ghosts and more like home.